think we must be very careful at this point to differentiate between those Haitians that are asking for help from the US or the UN, some of whom are members of the opposition, some of whom are former leaders, and the actual Haitian people on the ground. Haitians do not view the US or the UN or even France as having legitimacy in the country. The international interventions that have been going on for decades have actually made things worse for people on the ground. So I think it's very clear that there is a divide within Haitian society about those that want assistance and those that are vehemently opposed to it.
The US, though, has and is sending a team from the FBI and Homeland Security to assess the country's needs. Is that an appropriate thing to do, do you think?
Any time that a country asks for assistance from the UN, it is an appropriate thing for the UN to respond in a manner that the country wants. So sending in an FBI team, sending in investigators or fact finders with the country's acceptance of that is one thing. Sending in troops, which is what people are worried about, that there will be a new peacekeeping operation or a new stabilization mission on the ground would be something completely different. And I think that the US and the UN need to be very careful that they stick to the parameters that the Haitian people want.
One of the issues that you've pointed to is the fact that it's quite chaotic. It's not clear who's in charge and who may be in charge in a month or 6 months from now. What do you make of that chaos and the confusion?
I think that we have to be really careful about not calling Haiti unruly, as the former French ambassador did recently, not talking about sort of chaos or ungovernability, because this is language that's been used about Haiti since 1804, since it overthrew the French and freed itself from slavery. Actually, Haitians know how they want to run elections, and it's often the US pushing for those elections to be run too quickly that leads to fraudulent elections. Similarly, Haitian people know who they want to vote for, and it's not always the same people. The chaos caused in terms of the governance at the moment is because the former president was refusing to hand over power, had appointed 7 different prime ministers since he was elected in 2017, and was killed just at that point, as one prime minister hadn't quite stepped down and the other one hadn't quite been appointed. But I don't think that that is insurmountable. I think that there are ways, and it's, again, with great sadness that the head of the Supreme Court died from COVID, because he might have been able to make a ruling on who is the next legitimate leader in these circumstances. But I think what Haiti needs is support to work out within its constitutional law which of those prime ministers now steps up as president, or whether it's as the opposition leader is calling for the president of the Senate to do.
So what form do you think that assistance should come in?
I think that assistance must always come in a way that it's been asked for. There's clearly constitutional laws and constitutional rules around succession where a president is killed in office or dies in office. And I think that it's for the Haitian court system to ask for that assistance, whether from the UN or whether from the core group or whether from its allies, its regional allies in the Organization of American States. Yeah.
I mean, in the past, of course, after the cyclone, the people were sent in, the place was devastated. Has that support only fueled the instability?
The United Nations has left a legacy of cholera in Haiti, of sexual exploitation and abuse, and of children who've been fathered by peacekeepers who do not have access to their fathers who have left. And of human rights violations, including use of force and killing people during protests, during political protests, not people who were militia. For the United Nations to go back in now would be devastating for many Haitians, and there would be a real suspicion of the UN going back in that way. I wouldn't say that it's contributed to the instability, but certainly wave after wave of international interventions, including from the US and the UN, but also from NGOs and from Christian groups, has caused the country to not be able to learn how to govern itself in the way that it wants to, and has caused a huge amount of corruption amongst leadership who have embezzled money and who have been selling off land to multinational corporations, which again leads to political instability.
And that sort of corruption is very difficult to unravel, isn't it? As you say, that people want to have a voice, they want a proper democratic system, but that has not been really effective now for some years, and the place is in dire poverty, the infrastructure is under threat.
I mean, Haiti is one of the least developed countries, despite being so resource rich, and that's because it had sovereign debt to France, which it couldn't pay back, and spent 122 years having to borrow money to pay back this sovereign debt that France claimed it had because Haitians freed themselves from slavery. In terms of the corruption, it is very difficult to unravel. One of the key issues why so many Haitians were coming out on the streets to protest against this president, against the former president, is because of the massive corruption around the Petro-Caribbean oil money that was meant to be going into social projects, into hospitals, into housing, and 2 billion of it went missing in 2017, in the first year of him being in charge. What he then did was refuse to hand over power, and since 2020 has been ruling by decree. He said that anyone that was out politically protesting on the streets was a terrorist. He set up a national intelligence agency. He was moving back towards the type of dictatorship that Haitians had seen in living memory. There are ways to support Haiti, and to support Haiti in terms of corruption, just like there are with any country around the world. But the way to do it is not setting up another UN stabilization mission.
Good to talk, Rosa. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.